All right, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy that everyone's here. Really glad that all of our presenters are here. This is day 3, and this is Group C, expanding the study of teaching and teacher education. It will take place this morning from 10 to 11:30. Just want to give you guys a quick recap of how the sessions will go. We will have each group present for 5 minutes. I'm a pretty tough taskmaster when it comes to sticking to the time. But I'll give you like a good 1-minute window. So just to be fair for transitional purposes and different things like that. The way that I'll cue you is through the chat. If you are going over, I'll send you a direct message to let you know what time it is to begin to wrap it up, just in case you don't have a timer in front of you. And then we'll have the next presenter go, the next presenter go, until we have all presentations complete. And then after that, we will open it up for a quick question and answer. And hopefully our members and participants will have a lot of questions regarding each of the presentations. So the way that that's going to go, you're going to have to be actively participating, making sure you're taking notes, because if you have a question for the first presentation, you're going to have to hold on to that question all the way until the end of the 5th presenter. If you would like to participate throughout, you can use the chat box if you want to give a couple of affirmations, or if you want to put a couple of questions in the chat box, you can do that as well. So I don't want to take much more of your time. Now that we've gone over the process, I'm going to turn it over to our first group, which is Wendy Barron, Margaret Golden, and Leslie Young, and they will be presenting Together We Thrive, a practice session addressing the social emotional development of K through 12 educators.
Thank you so much, Terrelle. Let me go ahead and put this in the old view here. There we go. All right, everybody can see that all right?
Yeah.
Are we good? Great. Okay. Thanks so much for having us and for hosting this. It's a great idea. My name is Leslie Young from Chapman University. And Wendy, you can introduce yourself.
I'm Wendy Barron. So I've co-founded the Santa Cruz Silicon Valley New Teacher Project and New Teacher Center, and am now consulting regarding social emotional academic development.
And,
great to be here.
Great. Margaret was unable to join us today, but she's definitely here in spirit. So in January 2019, the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development confirmed that research reveals that teachers' own social and emotional competencies influence the quality of the learning experiences that they offer to their students. 2018 study of over 5,000 educators by Yale CEI and NTC showed that supportive, caring relationships among staff with and among students supports health and well-being, even in the face of high levels of everyday stress. So then as teacher educators, 2 questions immediately arose for us. One, which is, what are the impactful practices drawn from social emotional learning competencies that foster well-being and resilience in K through 12 educators? And how can these practices be integrated into the current implementation of teacher education? I just want to stress that we were looking at what we can do to help teachers. So much of the SEL is based on or focuses around what we can do to help students. But we think without dealing with the teachers and their own stress, it's pretty hard to deal then with the students. Okay, Wendy.
All right, so one way is that every time we design a meeting or professional learning, we use these 3 signature SEL practices that begin with a welcoming ritual that has some kind of grounding where we become present and mindful, self-awareness is fostered, and emotional regulation is fostered. And then we connect teachers to one another. So we're really modeling best practices that we want in the classroom as well. And then the heart of any kind of meeting or professional learning is engaging with one another and interacting and having the content be that we can really learn with and from one another. And then closing any session with an optimistic closure. So we have a sample forum that could be used with pre-service or teachers or school leaders that begins with a welcoming ritual. It's a mindful awareness practice and a check-in. And then our engaging practice we're offering is an internal reflection using journaling. And then we interact with one another by exploring with honest, open questions to support reflection and going deeper. And we close with a gratitude practice. So as any good professional learning meeting forum, we have some guidelines, and we're offering listening mindfully and making room for all voices and supporting each other to be authentic, and then to shift into curiosity, some inquiry, just wondering rather than judging or thinking that we're going to give each other answers for our whatever we bring up. So those are our guidelines. And we always want to check in with emotions. Let me just get back up here for a second. So we know that, Leslie, did you want to share about this, or would you like me to?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so much research over the years shows that emotions really impact our attention, our memory, our learning, even our decision-making in the moment, our judgment. And notice that emotion regulation is part of that. The quality of our relationships, even our physical and mental health and well-being is impacted by our emotions. So of course, everyday effectiveness and success is impacted. So that's why we're thinking about how do we think about social emotional development, well-being, and kind of the cognitive learning as coming all together.
So we do the issue exploration, what we call honest open questions. And here's some examples of what honest open questions would look like. We also go ahead and work with internal reflection and issue exploration. Again, this shows some examples of what that looks like. And then we finish with gratitude, a gratitude practice such as the one above. So we're moving a little bit quickly through these because of our time limit. What I do want to mention, though, is I went through this as a veteran educator in terms of stress and burnout in K-12. And I know that all of this could have been addressed through the practices we've just modeled, but my experiences were nothing compared to what teachers are living through today, what's been described as a veritable tinderbox of stressful conditions due to the pandemic. What researchers say is it's best if teachers put their own oxygen mask on first in order to buffer stress and to be able to direct their energy toward developing the kinds of high quality, safe, and trusting relationships with students that are vital, from which all else is built. I just want to mention that these practices, a lot, aside from being research-based, are also used a lot in a program called Millennium Forum, which Wendy is a facilitator for, and also Margaret, who's not here, is the director of. It's a program that's based in the Bay Area, which helps teachers to deal with the stresses in a very effective online format. So if any of you are interested in that for your teachers or your schools, here's the contact information, and Millennium Forum is there. You can see a demo of that. And then Margaret, of course, her email is here if you want more information. All right, I think that's probably our time, right, Terrelle?
Yes, thank you very much. Truly appreciate your research and taking the time this morning. So now we're going to go to our next presenter. So we can, now I know that we are recording, Alan. Will these presentations be available for download, or would the presenters be open to sharing their presentations just in case anyone wanted to look back through the slides? Because we know it is only 5 minutes, and you guys are sharing some great things within your research. So I guess that's one for Alan to
So the recordings will be posted to the CCTE YouTube channel within the next week or so. And
Okay.
once the 5 are done this week, we'll get them up there.
Okay.
But if people want to share in other ways, obviously you're welcome to.
Okay, perfect.
For us, you can contact us. You can ask Alan for our contact information, or the last slide I'll show really quickly. You're more than welcome to contact us, and we'll be happy to provide any information or whatever you might need. Okay, I'm over at Chapman. Wendy is a Gmail account. Okay.
Thank you very much. Truly appreciate it. All right, now we're going to move into our next presentation, Hope for the Future, Understanding the Experience of Latinx Community College Students Aspiring to Become K-12 Teachers. So we're going to turn over to you, Steve.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. For those who haven't had a chance to meet yet, which is probably most of you, my name is Steve Bautista, and I am a counselor and program coordinator at Santa Ana College. I'm also the vice president of our statewide organization, ACTEP. So this study is basically from my dissertation, and I defended my dissertation on July 24th, and it was uploaded to ProQuest last week. So I'm freshly baked out of the College of Ed at Cal State Fullerton, and this was my study. If you endured my 45-minute, 15-minute presentation that I uploaded to GoReact, I appreciate that. That was my first time presenting it outside of my defense. So this will be the second time presenting it, but I'm happy to share this work and have dialogue, because that's why I did this study. So it's really this study was really based on my experience as a community college counselor and program coordinator, working with students who are at the beginning of their journey in community college to become K-12 teachers. And so the inquiry questions that I lay out for this presentation, and in terms of the thought process moving forward, is really how does the community college experience of Latinx aspiring K-12 teachers inform us as teacher educators how we can better prepare students from minoritized populations to become highly effective teachers for our state. The second question I pose is, what is the role and significance of hope and the development of critical consciousness in the experience of Latinx aspiring teachers? And then finally, the third question that I would and look forward to dialoguing with you about is, how can we radically redesign the undergraduate experience of aspiring K-12 teachers to radically redesign the future of K-12 education in California? And I'll now share a little bit about my study and what I did. My study really looked at the experience of community college students who had transferred to Cal State Fullerton. And I interviewed 12 students who had come from various community colleges as future elementary, secondary, special ed teachers. They knew when they were in community college or before they entered community college that they wanted to become a teacher. And they were in a community college, and successfully transferred to Cal State Fullerton, and were juniors and seniors. So they were all still pre-service, not credentialed or in credential programs yet. And so the study really tried to look at this, the systemic inequality that's kind of presented here, is that really, this system exists where we have a lack of diversity of teachers for a number of different reasons, recruitment, retention, all those different factors. But the bottom bubble there really talks about the completion rates of students of color through community college and into the universities. And so I'm really looking at how do we better prepare students, or what are the factors that really look at the success of community college transfer students who are aspiring K-12 teachers, particularly Latinx students. And what I found was 4 really important things. One is that people matter. So I looked at the role of institutional agents, and those people that were included, that students talked about as part of their factors for success were professors. Their community college professors that they came in contact with, and the ones that exhibited a number of specific different factors, that they were really good teachers, that they empowered them through high expectations, that they supported them and connected them to resources on their community college campus. They were motivated by their own personal connection that these students had with their professors, that these professors validated and affirmed their career choice of becoming a teacher, that they felt that this was something important and encouraged them and supported them in that journey. And the important thing is they represented them as role models. So almost all the participants talked about the influence of their professors as role models and someone who had shared identities, whether it was ethnic identities or maybe linguistic identities, or even just values and ideologies that these students also shared, and even their own educational journeys. And the quote here that I have from Samuel, he was a bilingual student in K through 12 and struggled. He was obviously bullied in the system. The system wasn't ready for him. He didn't have any bilingual teachers. He actually got pushed out of the system. But he came to community college with the goal of becoming a teacher, an art teacher, and he connected with a professor at Santa Ana College, at a college where he was at, and that teacher talked about his own journey to becoming a teacher, and that Sam really resonated with that the pathway wasn't straight, that he realized that there were bumps along the way of a lot of educators, and that he could also become a teacher himself, and that was really empowered for him as well. The next slide, I'll talk about in terms of people matter counselors. So counselors also played an important role in these students' journeys, helping them navigate the pathway, helping them provide a personal connection, really helping them understand how complicated it is to become a teacher, and how important it is for them to have a plan to move forward. So this talks to almost all the participants talked about the role of counselors in their journey and how important they were in supporting them every step through the transfer process. And then programs matter. So we had half the students that I interviewed, 6 were in teacher prep programs at community colleges, 6 were not. And they had distinguishing differences between their experience in community colleges, or whether they were connecting to other aspiring teachers, getting involved with pre-professional service learning, professional development at the community college level. So there was a difference in the experiences of both those groups of students. And the community college preparation programs really provided valuable grounding in their professional preparation, in their desire to become a teacher as well. And then the last question I asked was about hope, the role of hope in this journey. And hope matters a lot. And it matters a lot in the whole experience of our students who are preparing to become teachers. It starts in the very beginning because they come into our system, higher education system, with hope, aspirational capital, the kinds of this desire and an interest in becoming a teacher. And I looked at 2 different theories of hope. One was Snyder's hope theory. The other one was Duncan Andrade's critical hope theory. And both these played out across the student's journey, whether it was the student's capacity to build their own agency and high hope and hopeful thinking in the process, as well as educators demonstrating critical hope to them as aspiring teachers and as college students in order to help them become successful. And then the final thing that really kind of came across was really this idea is that we have a lot of the students who want to become teachers. I asked them, the final question I asked them is, what hope do you want to inspire in your own students when you become a teacher? And that was really revealing. It was revealing in the fact that these students have K-12 experience, have had their own personal K-12 experiences that lead them to want to become a teacher, that lead them to want to make a difference in the future. That they have this very strong desire to want to be a difference for other students. And I don't think we capitalize that enough in our system, in education, in the path of becoming a teacher. We have these students who have come to these systems, they want to become change agents, but we're not really capitalizing on that. And so that kind of leads to what now. So my final what now is that I think as a state, we really need to recognize that we have students who are entering the pipeline who want to become teachers at the very beginning, and that our system doesn't support them all the way through. We put them into subject matter preparation programs and push them into force them into content versus really developing their skills as teacher. And when all these other presentations talk about identity, social emotional learning, good teaching, self-efficacy, resiliency, we don't do much of that at the undergraduate level, or hardly any of it. And it all happens at the professional preparation programs. And I think we're losing out on a really a valuable timeline and a piece to be able to support students and help them become teachers. And I'd like to see us as a state move to pushing some of that content and into whatever program that might look like. Maybe it's a minor, maybe it's an undergraduate major in education that really supports those students as they need to be. So that ends my presentation there. I thank you. I look forward to the comments and discussion moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bautista. You did an excellent job. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation, which is Critical Teacher Autoethnography, Stories of Hope and Possibility by Eduardo Lopez.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I feel really honored and privileged to be in this space to hear the other presenters' work and also share my own work. I just really briefly want to just say a couple comments just about the work. That it was really a reflection of the work that I and others have been doing in the department over a period of 16 years. I don't know if folks know, but at UCLA, we're a small program. I think in total, between the first and second year, we're about 300 students in total. The first year, so we're a graduate program where in the first year, students get their credential, and in the second year, they're working as full-time teachers. And in the second year, when they're working full-time teachers, they're doing an inquiry project. And initially, over the first about 10 years, we did a traditional action research project in which our candidates identified a problem of practice, and then engaged the action research projects to think of and design qualitative tools that would allow them to gather data and then make changes and improve that practice. In 2015, we at UCLA started an ethics studies cohort. So these are candidates that were recruited in English and social studies to then teach the ethics studies courses that are being adopted in LUSD. And that caused a significant change in the student population. I mean, that's not the only factor, but I mean, the student population had been changing up to that point, but I think that starting that program accelerated the change in the diversity. So right now we are, in terms of the total student body population, we are at 80% students of color in the teacher education program. And so that's a very significant change, where before it was a more predominantly white program, and that required a lot of work of thinking about like deficit views, engaging children, their teachers to think about the cultural assets of the community. But that has changed because now we have students who actually graduated from those schools or those communities where they're now teaching. And that required to change the project because we didn't have to do a lot of that work. So, and then at the same time in 2015, I became involved with the graduate student Loyola Marymount doing a dissertation autoethnography. And I became interested in that methodology, and I began to kind of think about how do I incorporate that into the projects that people were doing. So in the last 2 years, we've been adopting that autoethnographic component to the work that they're doing. And it's really shifted in terms of how they're thinking about the practice, because before they were really thinking about the tools. They're thinking about the questions, about the surveys, about the data crunching. And I think that shifted, they're thinking about their practice and who they are as teachers and the relationships with students. And taking a more ethnographic has grounded it more in terms of thinking about what is their ethnic studies pedagogy? Who are they in terms of their values as ethnic studies teachers? How do they incorporate the assets of their students and their lived experiences? And it's made a very dramatic change in that we hear now the voices of them in terms of their process and the voices of their students as they are engaging in this project. And then this year, I've also now incorporated art. So there's a lot of visual components. And I think also in this virtual context, taking time to create art pieces has also been very helpful, given also the mindfulness piece at the beginning. It has helped just to center and just use a space to think about differently. There's a colleague of mine who's also working with an elementary group who's developing and thinking about writing their own songs in terms of their teaching. And so that's a piece we've also been incorporating. So that's just a little bit of the work that we've been doing at UCLA.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to our fourth presentation, Got Resiliency, English Language Learners' Perspectives in Online Learning Amidst Systemic Racism.
Hello, Terrelle. I'm trying to share our screen, and it says that you need
I can
to
help you with that.
enable. I'm sorry, Alan?
I said I can hook you up on that. Just let me find you here.
Okay, sure. And while we're doing that, we can introduce each other. Hello, everyone. My name is Nirmla Flores. I'm with the University of Redlands. And go ahead, Kimmie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimmie, and I'm with California Lutheran University. How's everyone doing? Good?
Happy Wednesday, everyone. So it still says here, Alan, host disabled attendee screen sharing. Just let me know when it's ready.
And it looks as though I might be able to.
Okay.
Oh, you're able to do it. Okay.
There you go.
Both of you are now co-hosts. Either one of you can do it now.
Okay. You want me to do? Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. I'm able to share. All right. Here we go.
Don't worry, I did not take away any of your time. You have the full floor now, so go ahead and go.
Okay, good. Thanks, Terrelle.
All right, good morning again. Our article is entitled Got Resiliency, English Language Learners' Perspective on Online Learning Amidst Systemic Racism. And so with the interest of time, we're going to just dive right in. So resiliency, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Now, given the current COVID-19 context and the ongoing systemic racism, students, parents, and educators typically find themselves being challenged. For example, we have all been compelled to quickly learn and adapt to online learning, and thus navigate through the multiple challenges of connectivity, for instance, access to the right equipment, and of course, learn to speak a new computer language.
Right. So in our literature review, systemic racism continues to be embedded in our educational system, as we may already know. And for English language learners, the impact may be compounded given the intersectionality of racism, race and language, leaving them further marginalized in our educational system. So to combat these challenges for our English language learners, they must be more resilient. And some researchers argued that resiliency as a way to cope and adapt to changes can be affected by the environment or influenced by cultural and institutional societal factors, such as systemic racism or discrimination. Although researchers agree that the influences affecting resiliency are complex, there remains a lack of research on resiliency as it relates to online learning among our English language learners.
So our research questions, I think we kind of skipped one slide. There you go. And so our research questions revolved around the following ideas. Number one is the level of resiliency in an online format, the impact of access and computer knowledge, the extent of systemic racism influences on students' resiliency, and finally, the strategies to enhance English language learners' resiliency in an online learning. So based on a convenient sample, we surveyed 52 university students who were engaged in online learning from 5 different undergraduate and graduate classes and courses over in the period of 2019 to 2020 academic year. And so drawing upon the Nicholson-McBride Resiliency Questionnaire, we created a modified survey that gauged the level of resiliency. And utilizing Google Forms, participants voluntarily responded to the survey that basically composed of both open-ended questions as well as Likert scale format.
So here are our results. So we have three major components: self-perception, online resiliency, and the impact of systemic racism. So in the area of self-perception, 54% of English language learners identified themselves as exceptional, while the non-English language learners perceive themselves as 43% as exceptional. In the area of online resiliency, the majority of the identified English language learners perceive themselves as having a strong or exceptional level of resilience in online learning, specifically in the area of computer knowledge and skills. Now, as for the impact of systemic racism, although majority of the respondents felt that the systemic racism still prevails in our society, they perceive that little can be done about it, and as a result, their level of resiliency may be compromised. Moreover, they felt invisible as their needs were not met and their voices were not heard, and their sense of resiliency was further compromised. Some of the common issues or concerns shared by our participants in the area of online learning are: first one is the challenge of understanding computer language. And the second one is the lack of instructional strategies and supports. And the third one is limited professional and personal connections. And the fourth one is the lack of multiple assessment opportunities.
And please note that those results are just the snapshots of them. We didn't include every single results there is just with the interest of time. So it is important for us to know that ultimately resiliency is a set of attributes that provides people with the strength and fortitude to confront the overwhelming obstacles that they are bound to face in life in general. Right. And it is critical to be aware that individuals could be at a different level of resiliency depending on the situation. And ultimately, no one is ever at the exceptional level at all the time. So regardless, our resiliency level is constantly being tested and never linear as we encounter unforeseen circumstances such as the COVID pandemic, for instance, and an ongoing systemic racism. So to conclude, by understanding the different factors that impact resiliency, we can inform more effective policies and programs that advocate social justice and equitable education for students. And then, of course, through this lens of advocacy, educators can become a true change agent that strengthens students' resiliency and then empower them to fight against systemic racism.
Right, so if you guys have any questions or whenever Terrelle, yeah.
Excellent. Perfect. You have 12 seconds to spare. So we're going to go on to our next presenter. And that is our final presenter, which is New Teacher Perspectives on Good Teaching, Jessica Cruz and Andrea Zetlin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica. Dr. Zetlin is also present as well. So in the interest of time, we will definitely briefly go through our study, but we know in general that pre-service teachers, whether they come from traditional or alternative route programs, they've learned a lot in their teacher prep programs when it comes to what is good teaching. So we know that they want to be good teachers, provide engaging, developmental, and multimodal learnings through effective practices. However, the issue is, just like any other beginning professional, pre-service teachers need to be supported in those first several years in the classroom as they continue to develop their skills, develop their confidence, and their sense of self-efficacy overall as teachers of record. So when we look at the literature, we know that more attention is shed on general education teachers rather than special education teachers. And we also know that regardless of the credential program route that they're in, whether that's traditional or alternative, the primary related shortage, teacher shortages are primarily related to working conditions, specifically looking at the lack of support that beginning teachers have or don't have access to, since they are struggling in the classroom and or being able to manage their caseloads effectively. which does result in early departures in the field. And that's definitely not what we want. We want to retain our teachers for longer periods of time. So our study led to inquire in regards to what new teachers' perspectives are in regards to good teaching. How are they being supported towards this goal of being good teachers and having good teaching practices? And how does their sense of self-efficacy impact their projections in remaining in the field and their thoughts about remaining as special education teachers long-term? So in our sample, we had 115 teacher candidates that were enrolled in an induction seminar. So we collected, so the data was collected by Dr. Zetlin from fall 2016 to spring 2020. And we realized that 75% of those teacher candidates were alternative route candidates, and 25% of the teacher candidates were in traditionally route programs. The credential types that we saw in these teacher candidates were mild to moderate, which comprised of 58 teacher candidates, moderate to severe, 15 candidates, early childhood special education, which comprised of 28 candidates, visual impairments with 12 candidates, and finally physical and health impairments, which was 1 candidate within the 6 semesters of data collection. And finally, we noticed that the majority of our teacher candidates were female, which were 90 candidates, and there were 25 male candidates. So we can see the difference in more female teacher candidates being enrolled in these programs. Dr. Zetlin?
So in terms of the methods that we used, it was a mixed method study. And we had all these candidates who, again, were already in the classroom now teaching, and they were beginning their clear credential induction program. And they all completed a 2-part questionnaire. The first part of the questionnaire was quantitative questions, which focused on demographics, and contextual topics like, were they provided a support provider at their schools? You know, how often did they meet with their support provider? How helpful did they feel the support provider was? How did they manage their workload? How did, and so on. And then the second part of the questionnaire was 6 open-ended questions where they had to talk about their perceptions about supports and barriers related to being a successful teacher. So they were asked questions like, what is good teaching? You know, what does good teaching look like in the classroom? How does your school support good teaching? And what are a couple of challenges that you've had as a new teacher? So we analyzed the data, and we found that that 51% of these candidates had been assigned a support provider by their school district. The other 49% had to informally find someone at their school to serve as their support provider. They met with their support providers, 79% said very frequently. So that meant either daily, more than once a week, or once weekly. 93% of them felt that the support providers were very helpful or mostly helpful. And they varied in the types of support that the support providers provided, but over 90% of them reported that their support providers helped them in terms of instructional and emotional support, support with behavior management, managing the IEP process, case management, and assessment. We did content analysis with respect to the 6 open-ended questions in order to find out what was helping them or hindering them in terms of their ability to implement effective teaching. And we found 5 major themes: collaboration, support systems, student growth, classroom culture, and instructional practices. What that meant was, in terms of collaboration, they were talking about their ability to collaborate with teachers and with other school staff, like administrators, other teachers, teachers and families, teachers and students. In terms of support systems, they were talking about a variety of different types of supports that were available to them, like formal performance evaluations and the feedback that they got, resource and emotional supports, and the support from their mentor or coach or support provider, and lastly, paraprofessional support that they received. In terms of student growth, they were, again, all of these areas of themes were both positive and negative. You know, in terms of support systems, they talked about sometimes the lack of adequate support that impacted their skill at managing students. In terms of student growth, they were focused on whether their students were improving in the classroom, and they looked at that in terms of behavior management, academic performance, and relationship building. In terms of classroom culture, they were looking at how they were interacting with with the students within the classroom, things like social climate and cultural responsiveness and incorporation of diversity and cultural background into their instructional practices. And then lastly, in terms of instructional practice, they were focused on the desire to really provide effective instruction for their students with disabilities. And they talked about some of the factors that impeded that ability. So these were our findings from the study. We continue to analyze the data, and hopefully we'll report more to you in the future. That's it.
Okay, can we just give a virtual round of applause to all presenters who did an excellent job, which is fantastic. We have about 50 minutes of discussion, exactly. So I hope that you guys were taking notes and that you guys have questions for our presenters. With Zoom, sometimes when too many people go off mute, it gives a lot of reverb. So what I do ask is, if you do have a question for our presenters, if you can raise your virtual hand. If you do not know how to raise your virtual hand, down at the bottom of the Zoom, it says participants. You'll click that there, and then a little side screen will pop up on the right side of your screen, and it says raise hand. And you'll click that, and then I'll call on you guys in threes, okay? So in groups of three, so hold on to your question. If someone else asks the question that you were going to ask, you can elaborate if there was something that they missed. But we want to make sure that we are utilizing the 50 minutes to the best of our ability so that all questions can be answered. And then also, if you could just give a brief introduction of who you are before you ask your question, just so we can make this as personable as possible while we're in this digital environment, okay? So if anyone does have a question, please raise your virtual hand. I think Leslie raised her physical hand, so I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and allow Leslie to ask her question or further elaborate on anything that she would like.
Sorry, I raised my thumb because the hand wasn't showing up on my thing. So anyway,
that'll work. The thumb.
That's great. Well. I had a question for Steve. Steve, my question was, what is Santa Ana College doing to recruit possible students who are interested in the teaching profession?
Hi, thanks for the question, Leslie. Sure. So our college actually has a program called the Center for Teacher Education, a teacher preparation program that's embedded in counseling. And we actually have just shifted under the Guided Pathways framework, which is being kind of applied nationwide across community colleges, is kind of a new way to look at community colleges and approaching education in the fact that one of the ways is how students enter the path. Instead of having 275 different majors, that they have to pick from on an application, and it's always the big accounting because that begins with A, and that's the first one because a lot of them are undecided. So we have 1,000 accounting majors, and everybody else is kind of spread out. So we've created these called career and academic pathways. And one of the pathways that we created at Santa Ana College is that we package together our education program, our child development program, and our library technology program into a cap called Future Educators. And so now when students enter and come into Santa Ana College, they can find one of 6 different meta majors or career academic pathways, and one is called Future Educators. So our goal is to bring them, is to identify who those students are and bring them in. The challenge is that the way we prepare teachers in California is that there's no major called teaching, right? So they land in liberal arts, they land in child development. If they're a math teacher, they're in math. And math is actually in a different career and academic pathway at my college, and same with history, and same with other. And if they want to be a special education teacher, there's no box that they check for special education. And so we still have the job of trying to corral these individuals into, to identify who they are at the very beginning and provide support for them. And that's why, in my study, when I talk with the students, some of them were out colleges that had programs, but they never even heard of the program because they weren't in child development, and child development or education is where we house those courses. But we have them programs that are called, I want to be a secondary school math teacher, I want to be a special ed teacher. We don't have those programs, because they're not certificates and not degrees. So there's nothing for them to enroll in. So there's nothing for us to identify them with. So that's, I think, one of the bigger challenges that I would like to see addressed if we can. And so when we identify them, when they self-identify to us, they want to become a teacher, then we can support them. But then there's so many that we just miss because it's, the net has a lot of holes in it, right? And so we need to, I think, systemically find a better way that we can identify students at the very beginning, because we have a lot of students at the very beginning who want to do this work, and then support them all the way through. So hope to answer the question.
Thank you very much. Connie, you have a question?
Steve, you answered all of my questions in one fell swoop. Leslie asked something similar that I was going to ask, but I'm Connie. I ran a teacher education program at a university for years and now do so through a county office of education, so a district-based. I agree with you that for some reason education routes remain very, very confusing routes to teacher preparation. And so I appreciate everything you just said. It's absolutely so. And the key is partnership and putting our heads together and actually making moves forward. Steve, thank you so much for what you presented.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. We have to make the system easier to navigate. I give an hour information session to prospective teachers, and I have to navigate. You want to teach children, specify the children. Are those 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds? Because it's a little bit different depending on the age. And then it's what setting do you want to work in, and what kind of children do you want to work with? So it's like we parse it out. So we create this narrow versus really trying to support these students. And then most students at the very beginning don't know, they just want to become teachers. And so how do we support that pathway to get them to the point to where they're really refined in what they want to do? And then also I'm really curious with Eduardo's work in building this autoethnography, the story and building the journey of a future teacher from the very beginning. How do we scale that work you're doing with credential students to the very beginning, so students can begin writing their narrative of why I want to become a teacher? Because a lot of that's actually based on experiences that they had in K-12 that were either positive or negative. So how do we help them unpack that, identify what that looks like, and the shortcomings in what they experience, so they can become change agents moving forward and work on that from the beginning, and not just take English and math and science for educators and math for educators and how do we get them working on developing their tools as educators and social emotional learning and resiliency, all these things at the beginning. So.
Excellent. Gregory has a question.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Richardson. I'm the Special Education Program Coordinator over at Cal State San Bernardino. I want to, before I ask my question, thank all of the presenters. The information that you shared was phenomenal. Thank you to each of you for what you shared. My first question, and I'll ask the another one later, but it's to Steve. Steve, you had mentioned that people matter, and which is very important, and I definitely concur. You mentioned the professors, you mentioned the counselors, and you mentioned the programs. One of the concerns I have, maybe you can help me with this question, is at the community college level, students transitioning over to the four-year institution to get that credential. Many have to go through an undergraduate program first and then into the graduate program. And in some universities, go straight to undergraduate program that allows them to get the credential. But my question for you, Steve, is what are some of the things that you think that we can do to make sure that we open up that pipeline so there's constant communication between the community college and the four-year institution in order to help these students matriculate?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate that. I think the partnerships that I've seen have worked over my 20 years of experience of doing this work between community college universities is where you actually have someone who is well steeped at the university level in all the undergraduate pathways that are available for students who want to become teachers moving in, like a centralized person or office that knows all of the routes versus, oh, you need to talk to the liberal studies person if you want to become an elementary school teacher. You talk to this other person who does science, this other person who does math, because then it's very confusing. So our program is modeled after Cal State Fullerton's Center for Careers in Teaching. And they have an undergraduate advisement center. And it's been very beneficial because it becomes like a hub for the students who are aspiring teachers. They can go to one place and get advising about multiple undergraduate pathways. I think, and they also provide recruitment and they understand the pathways, because sometimes individuals who are working in colleges of education, graduate program, credential students, they understand the credential piece of it and the application process to get into the credential program and the steps, but not the undergraduate pathway. So I think if we could formalize, again, if a universities could formalize what that looks like and provide support to one undergraduate advisement center for aspiring teachers who are entering your university, that gives one place that students can go to, and then services can be kind of just centralized around one specific place. And I just think that helps. It's an easier transition. It's a handoff from community college. Oh no, you go to this person versus again, they have to navigate, different spots. So I think that might be one area to have that universities could possibly do to provide that type of support.
Great, thank you.
We had a question in the chat box from Keith. It says, I'm concerned with the piece of information that highlighted the Latinx hopeless perspective with systemic racism. I'm encouraged by the push to help teachers identify and reflect on their social emotional reaction to perspectives such as hopelessness. I'm wondering how we are helping to bridge the growing cultural reality that only my tribe counts. What strategies are we providing to help educators create cultures that embrace agreeing to disagree, but still seek consensus and mutual respect? If any one of our presenters would like to possibly engage with that question, that would be fantastic. Or if Keith would like to further elaborate on this question to help our presenters be able to engage, particularly with what it is that you would like for them to engage with.
I'd be happy to share a little bit about that or address that. So, this kind of spoke to the beginning teacher study that Andrea and Jessica shared as well. So either in pre-service, professional learning groups, forums, beginning teacher, one-on-one meetings with their mentors or support providers, or in forums, wherever we are gathering teachers and leaders, really having this attention around cultivating self-awareness of biases and judgments within the context of learning and looking at data, kind of thinking about what is contributing to data, what's contributed to your worldviews. So, having that self-awareness brought up ongoingly, and then having these kind of dispositions that Leslie and I talked about mindful listening and being non-judgmental and being curious about others' perspectives. Like, we as the facilitators of those communities, as we are intentional about incorporating those questions and that developing of self-awareness and social awareness goes a long way to helping break down kind of that tribal aspect that Keith is talking about. And also sharing stories. You know, when you know someone's story, you're less likely to judge that person and think of them as different. So in my experience of working with new teachers, and I was at UC Santa Cruz with pre-service and at New Teacher Center, and now my work across the state, it seems like these conditions that we've been talking about that are so important for our classrooms, they're equally important for our educators to really cultivate strong, positive relationships with one another. And so anyway, that's just one take on it.
I also like to add, and just so that we also think a little bit more critically about the word, for example, tribalism. And the way I think about it, I like to contextualize it within an analysis of power and marginalization. And so when I say that, I think we need to be thinking about how does power operate and how does violence operate in society. So think that there's vertical and there's also horizontal violence. So so for example, in our program, we have a large group of Latinx students, and part of my work is to help them think about so as this group has emerged into our program, we're now the majority in the program. So now what does that mean? Does that mean we're now like competing for scarce resources amongst other marginalized groups? Do we now get into protectionism? How do we redistribute? How do we rethink our relationship to that? And also within this context too of Black Lives Matter is, for example, also to think about how as Latinx, we have also been incorporated into anti-Blackness and how Latinos have also incorporated anti-Black views and perceptions of other groups. So I think for me, it's important as I work with this group is to think about, so are we now competing for the few scraps that people have thrown at us? How do we rethink then alliances? How do we think and acknowledge our own anti-Blackness and into our own communities in terms of like skin color and thinking about like deficit views of other people's children? So I like to contextualize it in that because I think if we focus our analysis on power, I think we would be able to think more broadly about how groups are being pitted against each other and how we can dialogue across differences.
Also to speak towards Keith, I know I'm the moderator, but I want to engage as well. Within our program at Vanguard University, we have a couple of things called signature assignments, because I see that the latter part of your question is specifically what are some strategies that we're using. And a lot of the strategies that we are using are signature assignments. One of them is an ethnographic study of our students. So our teachers, we go through a couple of assignments with them where they do have to do what Wendy was talking about. What are some of the biases that we carry? What are some biases that we hold ourselves? And they have to talk through those and list through those and understand that as a teacher, you're entering into this space, particularly when you're serving in low-income communities or wherever you might be serving, in a position of power, and understanding that power and understanding the influence that you have on your students as well. And if you do come into the classroom with implicit biases or biases, whether it's towards gender groups, whether it's towards students, whether it's toward, you have to be aware of those things in order to actively fight against those. Okay, so we paint the picture that everyone has them. This isn't particular to white teachers. This isn't particular to female teachers. That every single teacher enters into the classroom, whether you're from an oppressed or marginalized society or you're from the affluent society. Every teacher enters the classroom with biases. It's our job as educators to reflect, understand those biases, acknowledge that we have them, so that way we can actively fight against them through our awareness that they exist. So that's one strategy to help promote diversity and inclusion. The next thing that we do in our program is try to define as best as we can, what is diversity? What is inclusion? Because so many people have different definitions of what those terms mean. And we want to make sure that we are helping our students understand that in a particular way. And the diversity is beautiful. And the diversity, we're at a Christian university. So, you know, we talk about how it's a reflection of God and his creation and all these other different things like that. And we talk about the beauty that comes from a kaleidoscope, a beauty that is found within diversity. And then all those pieces come together to help us understand what education is and what is the job of an educator. So that's another strategy that we do. The next one, like I said, is we have what we call signature assignments, where we're forcing students to confront whatever it is that they might have regarding the populations of students that they will be serving. You have to confront that head on, and you have to have these deep conversations. I believe, I forget which presentation it was in, but it was talking about critical consciousness, right? And social awareness. We have to understand who we are within the greater society, right? And how those come into a head in the classroom. And having teachers understand that these things are important to students, even if we're coming from different social classes, different understanding, different ideologies. How are we preparing teachers to not just teach content, but to engage with the individual within the classroom? Students are not just data points, they're actual individuals, and understanding to help our teachers see them as humans. And how do we engage with at a certain level of humanity with our students? So those are 3 strategies that we use. Again, is how do we identify our own biases? How do we just admit that we all have biases? Can we be bold enough to list what those biases are so that way we can actively fight against them? The second one is understanding and codifying what diversity truly means within the classroom. It's not just about ethnicity, but we're talking about English language learners. We're talking about special needs students. We're talking about all the pieces that make up a classroom setting and what that looks like, and how a diverse classroom is actually a classroom that helps us become a great teacher, right? If all students are the same, sometimes students will do well in spite of the teacher. They're just great students. But having a diverse classroom actually helps you as an educator become an educator, right? And then the final one is those signature assignments that help students actually engage in that learning and that thinking, to push their thinking and understand that they are in a position of power, and how do they yield that power within the classroom, whether it's for good or is it to students' detriments.
Just wanted to add a little bit. I think as individuals, we're able to practice these types of conversations with ourselves, with our own identities. But when we're looking at teacher identities and how that professionalism looks like, it is really important for teacher ed programs to also incorporate these particular self-reflective strategies for teachers to start getting or increasing that awareness that as teachers, you have your own professional identity. How does that self-reflective practice looks like? And how would it look like in the classroom with students, and being able to also increase students' own reflective practices, which is really important. And I've noticed that a lot of teacher ed programs don't really maximize those limited opportunities where they can have these teachers engage and practice on that. And I know that when it comes to evaluation, it is a really important component in teaching overall. But I think being able to enhance these opportunities, even when you're looking at the power dynamics of like a mentor and a mentee, being able to start off with, how do you think this went for you? Being able to empower that mentee to start reflecting on their own practice and how their attitudes and beliefs may be impacting the way that they're teaching practice overall, but also how does that impact to their students and their families? And I think that's something that should be incorporated more, but I think it's a starting point to where we're starting to have these conversations, but it should be something that should be embedded more into the program so that teachers have more of a direct and facilitated conversation and facilitated way of gaining these particular awarenesses and being able to navigate this on their own once they're teachers of record.
This is Keith. I asked the question, and I actually come from Cal Baptist, and I have been at this job of teaching now for multiple decades. I'm much closer to the end of the career than the beginning of my career. And one of the things that strikes me as I listen to all of your comments is is one of the residual impacts of No Child Left Behind. And if you go back to the No Child Left Behind legislation, it redefined what universities would use to define scholarship. And that was the start of this very rigid, give me scientific evidence, give me data to prove that what you're doing is good. And what I'm struck by is that when I started my career in the 90s, and we were really focused on a lot of these issues we were talking about today, how that conversation disappeared as No Child Left Behind really gained traction. And, you know, somebody brought up this idea of radical education, or how do we radicalize education? I think it was actually Steve. And to a certain extent, you know what, we don't really need to radicalize it. We need to return to some of the basic roots, which is the discovery of the self instead of, you know, programming people to be computers. And so thank you very much for this conversation. It was very encouraging. I'm hopeful that we are once again returning to the good roots of teaching people rather than microprocessors.
Keith, thanks for clarifying the statements there. And I guess my inquiry question was not on radicalizing teacher education, but is how do we radically change teacher education? Because I'm in agreement with you is that the way we're doing things now is not producing the type of teachers that we need for the future. I think we need to really look at it and go about it at a more humanistic level, right? This profession that we do is about human relationships. And I think we have moved away from that in a number of different ways. And so I would agree with you there, but I would just backtrack to say that I wasn't talking about radicalizing in whatever definition that might be. It's more of radically changing the system so that we can better prepare teachers. But yeah, I appreciate your comments.
All right, we have about 20 minutes left. Steve?
Yeah, sorry, my hand raise doesn't work. I'm not sure because I'm a host or whatever, but I did want to ask Eduardo, I mean, your work with helping students and teacher candidates really understand the identities through their credential program. I'm wondering how that might be scaled to at the undergraduate level, because, you know, how to help students begin this process at the very beginning, because they do see themselves as teachers, they see themselves as future educators. To wait until they're in the credential program seems a little late. How do we help them? How could I help them now in that process? And what could we do systemically maybe to build that in?
Well, I mean, at UCLA, we just switched from the Graduate School of Education to the School of Education. So now we have a pathway for as an undergraduate major in education, and so that has like a whole bunch of definitions in terms of what we understand as education. So it also means like non-formal schooling spaces, thinking broadly about like the library sciences, just thinking about international education. But we do have one pathway in there that people are thinking about teaching broadly. So in there, so that undergraduate program just started this year. And then the other thing that I was thinking about too, as I was listening to your presentation, we also have now started a formal relationship with Santa Monica College to identify people who are interested in math science teachers, so that there's a pathway between Santa Monica College and then into UCLA, not just their math and science programs, but also to articulate the idea about teaching, so that they can start that relationship between the community college into going the UCLA. You know, a lot of people have also, Angela Vanzuela have also been talking about homegrown teachers. So how do we think about this relationship from a K university pathway, right? So we're not just thinking about by the time they get to community colleges or to think about once they get to 4-year institutions, to think about teaching from a secondary point of view. And that's really interesting because, like I said, I mean, when we place our students, we place our students in particular types of schools. So they have to meet particular criteria. They have to be schools that have high percentage of students of color, low income, English language learners. So we place our teachers there. And so we've been there now in schools for, like, in some cases, over 20 years. And by that I mean is schools where we're sending our student teachers to. And then we place our first year teachers in those schools. And one of the things we're finding is because our teacher candidates saw and were inspired to become teachers, they also now are ending up in our program because of those relationships that they have. So now, I mean, I have teacher candidates who were my students who were teachers. So that now they're telling me, I was a student for so-and-so, Mr. or was my teacher, or Miss was my teacher, or they were my teacher. So it's this relationship now that we formed as a result of that. So we're creating this pipeline.
Thank you.
Andrea? Yes.
I just wanted to say at Cal State LA, we have a pretty rigorous undergraduate teacher ed program. And we also have formed relationships with high schools that have these teacher clubs, where the future teacher clubs, where they actually have begun offering classes at the high school level that connects them with teacher education. And that's another good place to start. It's the whole idea of self-reflection and thinking about, why do I want to become a teacher? And I think we really do need to look at that whole K through 18, K through 16, continuum, and think about how we can build some of those connections in a stronger way.
Just to add to this, our county office superintendent convened high school principals, our community college, and our local UC Santa Cruz leaders of the teacher ed program together to actually think about this pipeline. So we do have some high schools offering, like you were just saying, some clubs, but it's a class where, they're learning about the brain and neuroscience and how we learn, and they're learning teaching practices. Our community college now has some classes that then UC Santa Cruz accepts. So, it was just this superintendent that was so brilliant. She even was working on housing for new teachers to keep them in our community. So it does take like these partnerships and this kind of thinking about a pipeline. So that's just one idea.
I think one of the challenges that I think there's a great idea. It's when you have an individual school that built a partnership with another school, and they have one unique partnership, but then it can't be scaled, right? Because, we created this one course with Santa Monica College. You got to take Santa Monica College, and if a student at Santa Monica College, they can't really take that class because it's only offered at Santa Monica College, and we won't take the SAC version of that. So we get into that. So students have to decide at the very beginning, they're committing to one school, or there's the flexibility. So, I think how do we scale some of these things, right? And then sometimes we ask community colleges to produce a course, that's maybe articulated with a high school K through 12 program, but then it's not accepted at the university, right? And then that becomes a problem too. Then we're just telling students, you take this class, it doesn't really count, but it's a good way to explore. So, in terms of efficiency, using the resources and helping students not get into more debt or accumulate more units than needed. If we can, look to see how those pathways can also be articulated at multiple schools across the UCs or the CSUs, I think also would be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I think we need to have a real a re-examination of this whole process, starting at the high school, maybe even the middle school. You start getting people thinking about their careers. But the idea is that there needs to be leadership, which actually pulls us all together. So it's not with our very limited resources, we do it in one school and we have a connection to that school, but we do it as a process and a continuum.
Right. Nirmla has a question.
Yeah, this is a question for Wendy. I know Wendy, your partner Leslie is no longer here, but this is addressed to your presentation on the social emotional learning. I really appreciate it because at the teacher preparation program at the University of Redlands, we put heavy emphasis on the social emotional learning component, especially for Cal TPA 2.0. And so I'm wondering if your program has a way of aligning, your SEL program has a way of aligning the Cal TPA 2.0.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so my program, I am supportive of the Millennium Forums, which cultivates teacher social emotional competencies and skills. And most importantly, it creates these conditions, which we're learning so much from, like research institutes like AIR, that focusing on creating these conditions or this climate of supportive, caring relationships is critical. And it's easier to measure conditions versus development of competencies. So I think that for Millennium, the focus has been on creating these conditions and then supporting teachers in thinking about what are the social emotional skills they're developing and how can they apply those to their classroom. I have a bigger context. I'm on the CDE SEL task force. And so I'm, part of, there's a competency group, a policy group that's looking at pre-service through induction, through the lifelong career of teachers into administrative credentialing. And how do we think about this as a whole system? And the CSTPs are being revised right now. And so there's kind of this whole rethinking, what is transformative social emotional learning? How do we think about equity? How do we think about, culturally responsive teaching? It's like all of this is coming up right now. So I'm a person that in any context that I'm working in, I'm kind of attending to the standards for whether it's, teacher credentialing or whether it's the, content standards or the CASEL framework, and thinking about MTSS. How do you think about this as an integrated systemic effort of academics, behavior, social emotional learning, tiered, and diversity, all students? So, I can't really answer it specifically that Millennium Forums are addressing in particular, what you're referring to, Nirmla, but I do know that it's cultivating conditions that we want to have cultivated in classrooms and cultivating the adults' competencies, their reflection, their analysis of their own biases and judgments and questioning, because there's so much attention to having diverse groups of teachers coming together that bring these multiple perspectives. So I don't want to go on and on, but that's
great. Thank you, Wendy. I know we don't have much time. There are so many components of SEL. Just quickly though, are you affiliated? Is Millennium Forum affiliated with CASEL.org, the organization, the cognitive?
Yes, they are. Yeah. Yeah. And
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy.
At this point, if there are no more questions, we would like, we do? Okay, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask a question. This is to Steve and just also maybe just more broadly. Steve, I don't know if you had a chance to come across this publication. I just put it in the chat, and it's called We All Want More Teachers of Color, right? Concerns about the Emerging Consensus. And not that I have an answer to this, but this is something I think about a lot. And in this publication, Thomas Philip, who's over at Berkeley in their School of Education, is asking this question that there's this big push to create, funnel more students of color into teaching. And I mean, we're certainly engaged in that work. And then when they get there, they become really disillusioned, and also they're essentially pushed up because either they're very strong advocates of students of color, they have very strong social justice orientations, and they see themselves as advocates, but they're teaching in very traditional schools. So we're preparing these teachers, we're encouraging them, these teachers, to fight the good fight, and then they get to places where they're not wanted. And then they leave the teaching profession entirely because they get so disillusioned or beat up. And so Thomas, in this research brief, is asking, how do we think about this push to diversify the teaching force more broadly, beyond just getting more bodies into these spaces? I mean, like I said, these are things I have no answers either, but I'm just, it's a fascinating, and it raises a lot of tough questions. So I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a really great point. You know, we had a speaker at our last convening who talked about the culture of schools aren't really supportive of teachers of color, right? And that's a lot of time it's other teachers who are pushing teachers of colors out. And so, yeah, how do we address that? And I don't know. That is a really good question. You know, I think it's equipping, right? As we can try to equip our students to enter those spaces, but then also to help them become change agents of those of the educational system. So it is a conundrum. I don't know the answer, but I think it begins at like all the work that we're all doing is at the individual level, right? Helping each individual teacher who goes into this profession kind of understand like what are the history, and then what needs to change, and then how to be agents of change, and then the collaboration. I think one of the presentations talks about one of the biggest skills that teachers need to have is collaborating. So how do we help our students now begin collaborating with individuals who, you know, either have different views or similar views, so that when they enter teaching the work environment, they can collaborate in ways that can change the culture. So, but that is probably a really good question, Eduardo. I don't know.
I'm modeling wait time.
Well, I think Terrelle, that what the questions that Eduardo has raised and that Steve's replying to gets us into the area of induction as well as teacher preparation. And that I think a lot of people are now committed to drawing more teachers of color, more students of color into our programs to prepare and become teachers, on the assumption we know the schools need them, but if the schools actually don't want them, as Eduardo is suggesting, that becomes a problem. How do we work with that area as well? How can the teacher ed programs reach out into the schools that they work with and make sure that there are inviting spaces for these new folks to come into? And if they're not, then what can we do to make them better? We do have folks within our overall CCTE program that work with induction, and this is part of the question we can take to those folks and see what can be done. But that's clearly an important issue, one that I hadn't heard before. Eduardo stated in exactly that way, that if in fact we're preparing teachers that aren't going to be welcomed, that's a real problem. Maybe a new area of research, or at least to do some scouting. Well, while we're at it, can I say we really appreciate all of you who are contributing to this discussion, and and doing the research that we're talking about. And remember, we have a spring conference coming up. We have a fall conference this year again, so that whatever sort of studies you're working with, keep letting us know about it. Keep getting on our program, and we really appreciate it. It's what the purpose of these conversations this week are really to encourage that sort of thing to continue, and to talk back and forth among yourselves in terms of what you're studying and what implications it has. So really appreciate you all being on board.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters. We really appreciate you coming aboard and sharing your research and engaging in questions. And I believe that it was a very, very fruitful conversation. So thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you guys all again, hopefully at our next CCTE conference in the spring, and then also in the fall of 2021, hopefully amongst each other.
Yeah, we might even be face to face by fall. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you for allowing me to moderate the conversation and putting up with my chats, letting you know that I tried to be as cordial as possible. But everyone did a wonderful job sticking to the time, and even further in the question and answering and making sure to engage with everyone. So thank you again for joining us for this virtual group, and we look forward to seeing you all very, very soon.